Greetings all, and welcome back to A Traveler's Guide 2. After getting some funds to refuel our transport ship and make sure it's still up to snuff, we are finally on our way to the next planet affected by the Phazon Crisis as we take a new trip to the next segment of this line, A Traveler's Guide to Planet Bryyo. Before we dive right into the planet, let's take a look at Bryyo and a brief history of the events that have transpired there in recent times. Bryyo is a planet discovered by the Galactic Federation in the year 2068 in the Calendar region's Federation solar system that exists on the very edge of Galactic Federation territory and is known for its vast fuel gel resources and its involvement during the Phazon Crisis as a target for the space pirates and Leviathan from Phase. In its current state, Bryyo is a mostly uninhabitable wasteland, stuck in tidal lock, with 40% of the planet scorched by its parent star forever, while another 40% of the planet is locked in an icy shadow, thus leaving only 4% of the planet that is actually habitable in the planet's equatorial region. In ancient times, the Reptilicus inhabitants of this planet, known as the Bryyo in their own language, were an advanced race that sought to explore the stars and further the cause of science wherever they went. But their downfall came in the remarks of those that preferred the old tribal ways and who were opposed to the furthering of science, lest it strip away all meaning from the ancient ways that had gotten the Bryyo to the point in their technological development in the first place. Tensions mounted between the primals and the lords of science until the first lord of science, Phazon, denounced the primals in the center of the royal city, starting a war between the two sides that ultimately ended up costing both dearly. The lords of science unleashed their devastating war golems and devastated the lands in the process, while the primals cursed the lords with their darkest magic and fought fiercely to destroy them. While the lords of science may have had the upper hand in terms of technology, they were heavily outnumbered and eventually ran out of resources, forced to hide away as they were hunted down one by one and killed, regardless of all they had done to make the Bryyo a once great civilization. As a result of all the destruction they caused, the planet was left mostly barren, with only a very, very small area left that could actually still sustain life. The last Lord of Science understood the devastation they had caused and did everything he could with his last resources, used in collaboration with the ways of old and new, to clean the pollution from the final habitable parts of the world, hoping to save it. The last Lord of Science was able to communicate with a primal prophetess that had predicted the fall of the Leviathan in the future, and the two of them did their best to prepare for the destruction, but due to an accident, the location was revealed to the primals. While the priestess was believed to have gotten away, it's likely that the last Lord of Science was destroyed by the primals, ending the reign of science on the planet. It was not until 10 years before the Phazon Crisis that the Galactic Federation discovered Bryyo and found that it had vast quantities of fuel gel on its surface, making it a valuable piece of property to control. As such, they placed the planet under their exclusive protection and control to ward off attacks from space pirates and explore the ruined complexes and relics of the planet to gain a better understanding of its history, though the local Reptilicus had to be watched out for, as the primals did not approve of any type of technology at all anymore. During the Phazon Crisis, Bryyo was hit by a Leviathan and its effects were almost immediate. Phazon-based life forms and structures started to appear across the breadth of the planet's limited visible land, and the Phazon space pirates quickly took control of the planet, building a pair of Leviathan shield generators in order to ensure that no one could easily fly to the Leviathan seed and try to destroy it. The primals, under the effects of Phazon corruption, lost all sense of mind and higher thinking as a result of the substance and became nothing more than wild animals led by pure instinct, rendering them just as extinct socially as the Lords of Science were made many years before. The bounty hunter Rundus originally sent to the planet in order to help clear out the space pirates, but the hunter was sent in after she awoke from her coma because the Galactic Federation had lost all contact with Rundus and the rest of the bounty hunters. The hunter would eventually discover that Rundus had been taken under the wing of Dark Samus through Phazon corruption, and she was forced to terminate him. Following this, she managed to destroy the two Leviathan shield generators and entered the Bryyo seed, where she was able to defeat the seed's guardian and killed the Phazon core of the Leviathan, freeing the planet from further corruption and in turn fulfilling the wishes of the last Lord of Science to save the world from certain disaster. With the origins of the natives most known for the occupation of this planet and recent events established, let's take a look at the different parts of this planet that have been made accessible to explorers and see just what sort of flora and fauna can be found there. A special note should be given here though, that we won't be covering any entries or tech from the Phazon space pirates that were once present here. That will be saved later for examination of the pirate homeworld. Bryyo Cliffside, as its name suggests, exists on the edge of a sheer cliff in a habitable valley and has plenty of airborne and ground-based life forms making a living for themselves in the ruins of ancient Bryyo structures, many which share clear influence from Chozo designs, and unfinished war golems left by the Lords of Science when they ran out of resources to power their machines. Attached to the cliffside air dock are a number of large spherical objects that are chained to the stone of the site with huge metal links, their surfaces alight with fire and energy. It is thought that these orbs are actually the remains of starships used long ago by the natives of the planet to explore the stars and planets around them, though in their current damaged state, it is unlikely that they will find use among the primals of the Reptilicus in the near future. A Galactic Federation Griffin-class frigate, the GFS Theseus, crash-landed close to the landing site of this area and has become a permanent fixture on the planet. Though it is not completely certain what caused the ship to crash, it is speculated that the vessel was attacked by space-powered forces and attempted to land at the cliffside air dock, but was unable to make it and crashed shortly before the Hunter arrived on the planet to cleanse its corruption. Regardless, she was able to establish a satellite uplink on the downed vessel by manually breaking the hatches keeping up the panel protecting the wall containing the room's energy conduits, which she was able to pull together with her grapple lasso to restore power to the ship and make it possible to interact with the satellite uplink via a security lever. This in turn made it possible for her to explore the other areas of Bryyo by locating landing sites for them, plus she was able to use the interior of the vessel to install new weaponry onto her ship. The creatures that live here are fairly benign for the most part and will only attack out of predatory instinct, but it is nonetheless a hotbed for the Reptilicus and their pets, so caution is still recommended when exploring it. This is the land believed to have been saved by the Lords of Science in the final hours, and while the primals may never come to appreciate that as they should, their efforts were nonetheless a success, and Bryyo Cliffside is a standing achievement for what they could have been capable of on the rest of the tidally locked planet if the war had not ended as it did. Now then, let's take a look at the biota that can be found within the craggy and somewhat cavernous yet open-air cliffside area, starting with a few minor creatures that can be found within it. Similar to plant forms bioengineered by the Luminoth, cash plants have been semi-bioengineered by the Reptilicus, though in a much more primitive manner than used by the Luminoth, to grow over supplies as they develop and eventually mature. These bulbous plants can easily be ruptured to retrieve their contents when they are young, but as they age and turn into mature kosh plants, they develop a bark-like outer skin that can only be penetrated with heavy weaponry. The Bryyo bee is a small insect native to Bryyo that is really identified by its bright red carapace and the blue undermarkings it possessed during the Phazon Crisis. These creatures build small nests in the hooks of hopper nests when they know they can be protected, as hopper nests are incredibly durable and are avoided by most predators, as is all the alpha hoppers that are often used to defend them. These creatures gather nectar from the few flowering plants left on the planet, and use it in combination with their own saliva to create a sweet honey that is prized as a delicacy outside of Bryyo, but hated by the natives, as it contains a toxin that Reptilicus are weak against. These creatures can be attacked with weaponry of any kind, and during the Phazon Crisis, this would result in them exploding and hurling blue blood everywhere, their bodies enriched by Phazon. In their current state, the blood has reverted back to a green color, but they are otherwise unchanged, indicating that they were not as badly infected and mutated by the presence of Phazon as other creatures. The scale of vine is a rare plant form that has come to feed on fuel gels as its primary source of nutrition, as with many other life forms that are on Bryyo. Unlike most of its fellow feeders, however, the scale of vine is actually difficult to kill, as it naturally grows a thick bark over its fleshy interior where the fuel gel is processed that keeps it from easily being ignited by accidental contact with another creature. This makes them ideal to use as organic ropes to chain creatures and machines to a specific location, as physical attacks will rarely be enough to set them off. Most of the time, this protection also serves to keep them safe from energy-based attacks, but if a pool or stream of the substance the vine is feeding off of or nodules of crystallized fuel gel are ignited nearby, it can be enough to light up the vine from the inside out, causing it to burn away at a rapid pace and thus removing it as an obstacle. The Bryyo leaves possess a striking resemblance to Venus flytraps from Earth, but are generally a bit less active when it comes to larger prey, as they will never close down anything that puts significant physical stress on their traps to save on time and biological resources. This seems to have been developed as an answer to dealing with the limited biota of the planet, as these monstrous plants cannot afford to waste time trying to digest a heavy creature if it means wasting too many resources to get the meat out of it. Plus, the stiff wall anchoring of these creatures prevents them from easily disposing of hard parts once the prey item has been wiped clean. In fact, these plants generally do everything in their power to keep larger objects away from their trap structures. This often means that the leaves of the plant, which are rather sturdy and can be used as a stable platform, will rotate at high speed shortly after a significant force is applied to them to dislodge the roving organism. Sadly, these creatures were heavily damaged and poisoned by Bryo's Phazon corruption, but now that the substance has been removed from the area, it looks like the species might be able to make a full recovery in time. With those out of the way, we can now focus on some of Cliffside's more prominent entities. The term night barb describes several different species of airborne creatures that are effectively identical in terms of behavior and overall lifestyle. The type that is known to still be in existence are the night barbs of Bryyo, which possess a four-bladed body form that is extremely aerodynamic and allows these creatures to fly almost indefinitely without ever having to worry about taking a rest. These variations are extremely weak and can be killed easily with basic gunfire, but they do tend to travel in swarms to make up for this, and thus have managed to survive on Bryyo despite not having much in the way of defense to work with. These entities can generate a protective energy shield around their bodies as a defense mechanism, but the shield comes with a cost as it is highly unstable. If the night barb's energy shield makes direct contact with any other life form, it will explode and kill the night barb in turn. though the explosion is usually enough to convince a potential predator to leave the rest of the swarm alone. The only other thing these different creatures have in common is the fact that they are predators and often dine on small insects and other minuscule life forms they come across, though it is not unheard of for entire swarms to attack larger creatures if they think that they have been severely weakened and can be killed fairly easily. Despite this, they can be easy to manage and are not a massive threat to most, even as a swarm, because of just how frail they tend to be and how weak they are towards larger creatures offensively, and are thus best assigned to threat level Alpha. The Phazon nightbarb is a result of normal nightbarbs being energized and corrupted by the effects of Phazon radiation. Exposure to the toxic substance has changed the body color of these creatures to a dark bluish form and has gifted them not only with greater power, but also greater aerial maneuverability, making it possible for them to fly so fast around each other that it's virtually impossible for anyone to target and attack an individual member in a swarm. Instead of relying on the basic energy shields for defense, these creatures gain the power to combine the total energy reserves to launch devastating projectile attacks that could easily devastate smaller creatures. This was done by focusing all of their energy into a single spot as the swarm flied in a circle, creating an energy node that would disperse its energy in one of three ways, depending upon the color of the energy core. If the energy core was green, the creatures would fire a series of energized projectiles at their target in rapid fashion. If the energy core was violet, the Phazon nightbarbs would take the energy back and use it to energize their own bodies before performing a suicide tackle towards their target. Lastly, if the energy core was blue, the creatures would fly around erratically in the nearby airspace and begin to discharge large amounts of electricity to attack. These attacks can make these otherwise insignificant monsters a pain to deal with, but they could have their own attacks turned on them. While the energy core they created to launch their attacks might have seemed stable, it was not, and it was directly connected to the internal energy systems that sustained these creatures. As such, concentrated weapon fire could destabilize and destroy this energy core, and doing so would generate a feedback loop that would cause all the Phazon nightbarbs attached to it to detonate. This should not be taken lightly, however, as it could deal some serious damage with their attacks and required some patience to wait for them to make themselves vulnerable to actual weapon fire with their attacks, and in turn were a step above their normal counterparts, best fitting within threat level Beta. Gragnols are an insectoid race of organisms that are often considered to be the war wasp equivalent to the planet Bryyo, though their anatomy and lifestyles are significantly different from them in practice. Young Gragnols possess a small body form with very small wings on their backs that they use to hover in the air, though they are not made for long flights and thus tend to glide more so than fly when they are young. They only use their stamina to fly if they are under attack, or otherwise feel that their hives are being threatened. The young Gragnol does not possess the sturdy exoskeleton of the Gragnol adult, and therefore can be killed fairly easily with even minor firepower. As such, they oftentimes travel in groups in order to make up for their general weakness, though this does not really increase their overall threat against armored opponents. Prior to the Phazon Crisis, these creatures really had no way to defend themselves from attack, and are thus limited to just dive bombing their targets that they thought were a threat, coming out in mass drills near the hives in order to fight off their attackers. As soon as Phazon was introduced into the environment, however, these creatures gained the ability to fire small bursts of Phazon from the mouths in order to attack targets from afar, though this was still not enough to make them a dire threat. Even if they are swarming around their nest, a charged beam shot or missile to a Gragnol hive is enough to destroy it, though the largest of hives are known to be constructed from an extremely durable biomatter made from their saliva and plant matter that is virtually indestructible, and it will take the Gragnol some time to repair it, or may never end up finishing the job if they're all killed before they can create their protective nest again. Overall, young Gragnols are not a serious threat and can be dealt with fairly easily without having to rely on heavy firepower, even if they do decide to attack in large groups, and are thus best placed in threat level Alpha. Gel parvus are very closely related to the parvus found in Talon 4, but their exposure to fuel gel and Bryyo has radically changed them. With few predators in the way of their existence, these creatures have come to rely less on their gases for damage and have adapted to living off the fuel gel that coats the planet for sustenance. As a result, the gases they used to float in the air have lost their toxic touch and have been replaced with fuel gel vapors, which have their advantages and disadvantages. In terms of a positive effect, this change increases the blast radius of these creatures' attacks when they detonate, making them far more dangerous to handle in close quarters. At the same time, however, the infusion of fuel gel into their form has made their shells very unstable, making them a bit easier to destroy and damage. Thankfully, as with normal puffers, these creatures are fairly benign and are easy to avoid as long as direct contact is not made, but the sheer explosive power that they wield naturally is still enough to be a serious concern for most explorers, armored or not, and thus still belong with the rest of their brethren in threat level Beta. The Harper and its relatives are insectoid creatures adapted to survive the harsh environments of the planet Bryyo within all habitable parts of it, as well as the planets of Excelsior and Bion within the Bermuda system, and share a similar ecological role as creatures like the beetle of Talon 4 and the splinter of Aether. These beasts possess 4 thin legs that are tipped with a large talon at each end, perfect for raking and piercing through soft flesh, which these creatures use primarily as the means of offense in close quarters. They can, however, attack prey from afar and weaken them with a blast of acidic venom from their mouths that is strong enough to corrode weak metal. The hopper gets its name for its strange gait, as the joints in the legs cannot remain in a bent state once tension begins to build up in them. In short, every time they try and move the joints in the legs, they spring right back into place and thus force these creatures to move in short hops. It is thought that this mechanism is in place to make them better hunters, as they can store a significant amount of energy in the limbs to leap up with great momentum so they can impart a greater stabbing force with their talons when they come down on a target. The hopper is also unique in that they carry their brood with them at all times, the offspring stored beneath a translucent layer of exoskeleton material. This mechanism is in place to make it easier to colonize new areas, as the creatures are constantly searching for new places to start a hive and are better suited to producing a new population of hoppers that they can give birth to offspring in a single spot immediately. Despite their imposing forms and horned carapaces, the shell of these creatures is actually rather thin, so it can easily be destroyed with continuous gunfire. As such, these insectoids tend to travel in packs to make up for their individual weakness and to overwhelm larger targets with multiple assaults. Their forms are certainly rather sturdy and can take more firepower to take down than many of the insectoids that roam the inhabitable surface of Bryyo, but their predictable movement patterns can make it easy to track them and overwhelm them with immense firepower, and thus are best placed within threat level beta. Alpha hoppers behave almost identically to normal hoppers, but differentiated by the larger horns and the red body color, in contrast to the greenish-yellow coloration of normal hoppers. Aside from them being much harder to kill as a result of the thicker carapaces, alpha hunters are a bit smarter than their common brethren, as they're able to use flanking tactics to assault potential targets, having some members attack and distract a prey or predator while another set comes in from the back and attacks them while the back is turned. Alpha hoppers serve as the shock troops of the hopper hive, and are extremely powerful despite their small size, but they're also much harder to produce as few members of the species have the right genetics to become these advanced variants, leaving a hive heavily unguarded if its troop of alpha hoppers is wiped out by a dangerous force. Even if they are put into the situation and must flee to make a nest elsewhere, this does not mean that the nest will go away. In fact, hopper nests, which are constructed out of a thick amalgamation of rock, organic webbing, and shed hopper exoskeleton material, which explains the jagged and fibrous appearance of the nest itself, are practically indestructible against any reasonable form of portable weaponry. As noted though, while these types of hoppers in particular can be a lot harder to take down because of their stronger bodies, their behaviors and attack patterns are otherwise mostly identical to the normal hopper, and are thus best suited for threat level beta alongside them. The shellbug and gellbug describe the larval and adult form of an insect group that has come to rely on Phazon and fuel gel for protection, and has thus undergone some serious changes since the destruction of Phase, but the creatures are nonetheless doing fairly well in the absence of Phazon. The shellbug is the larval form of the gellbug, and possesses a small stout purple body with small patches of phasite growing in the segment cracks of its body. Shellbugs are fairly slow-moving and do not possess much in the way of armor to protect themselves with. Their soft body is vulnerable to basic fire and killed with only a few shots from a weapon like the power beam. It is only in adulthood that they will develop their characteristic phasite shell that can protect them from the most direct physical attacks. Since they do not have a shell to retract into for defense, these creatures have learned to become aggressive when a large life form approaches them, generating and propelling sharp spines and small holes in their body towards their intended target. These creatures feed on small insects, the few creatures that live on fuel gel for sustenance, but in time their diet will change as they grow their shell and ultimately come to rely on the material as a primary source of energy. Their tendency to generate and fire spines and anything that moves near them can make them a nuisance to explorers that aren't paying attention to look out for the small forms, but because their shells are also rather flimsy and easily damaged, and even the most basic of armor suit protection can help to ward them off, they are best suited for threat level alpha. The Reptilicus, as they are called by the Galactic Federation, are what is left of the once proud reptile-like civilization that constructed the numerous ruins that dot the surface of the little habitable land that is left on Bryyo, but they have fallen quite far from the original stature in the universe. Following the war against the Primals and the Lords of Science, these monsters had no enemies to turn to and therefore began attacking each other, slowly losing any sense of morality and forgetting the magic of old that once made them a threat to the Lords of Science. After the impact of Leviathan into the planet, Phazon corruption took hold of them all and quickly degenerated what little higher thought they had, reducing them to wild animals with only the faintest traces of true intelligence left in their bodies. As a result of this corruption, the bodies of these creatures and their powers were also changed, though they still retained the triple-eyed visual system that is characteristic of the Reptilicus, and their overall threat level was increased so much that the Galactic Federation had to abandon its post on the planet during the Phazon Crisis as a result of flaring aggression from the locals. The normal Reptilicus, which possess a lizard-like body form with a humanoid body structure, have been heavily mutated by the effects of Phazon and have gained the ability to teleport short distances as a result of this mutation, allowing them to easily get the drop on a target that is not paying attention. In close quarters, these creatures are limited to using what they once deemed to be magic to create a sphere of energy to smash into targets that get too close to them, while from afar they rely on a barbed electrified throwing chakram that can deal damage and electrocute anything that touches it and can more than catch most opponents off guard. Since the weapon is almost always thrown twice in succession by them, it will automatically return to the Reptilicus along the same pathway when thrown, potentially snagging an enemy target as they move back into the line of fire. though this can be turned against them to kill them instantly if they are frozen with an ice missile before the weapon returns. While they tend to hunt in groups and therefore almost always have some sort of backup on the side, it is clear that the exposure to Phazon has not done these creatures justice, as the numerous plant-like spines growing out of their bodies give them a horrid, disfigured appearance that is more than unnatural. Thankfully for their sake and that of their opponents, they can be killed with a few blasts from a charged beam weapon, though it is known that they have grown resistant to the effects of field gel and can therefore tolerate pain from heat-based weapons more so than those based on something like pure light, such as the power beam, though in exchange this also seems to have made them more vulnerable to the effects of extreme cold as well to some extent. With all of this said, even if it seems like they have been robbed of much of their intelligence, they are still efficient fighters that rarely ever travel alone and do their best to coordinate their attacks with a partner, making them a larger threat than most of the beings on Bryyo and properly fitting them within threat level Gamma. Reptilicus hunters have not been so heavily mutated by the effects of Phazon on the planet, unless one counts the fact that they have grown an extra pair of arms and possess a beige scale color instead of the green bodies possessed by normal Reptilicus, but this may simply be due to a greater genetic resistance to the material. As a result of this, these creatures do not have the advanced ability to teleport, but they are still gifted in having the capacity to turn invisible for short periods of time, completely vanishing from one's view until they can get it close enough to launch a devastating attack. As with the normal Reptilicus, these entities rely on their throwing chakram to attack from afar, and can thus be a bit of a pain to deal with, but this is the least of one's worries. Once they get fairly close to their target, these monsters will also lash out with a flexible orange energy whip, supposedly powered by the magic utilized by the primals, that can deal moderate damage and potentially stun lesser creatures, although armor suits are generally able to repel this feature. In addition to this, the Reptilicus hunter has enough muscle mass to climb with little service to grip on, and has a tendency to bring along warp hounds with it to use as hunting dogs, compounding the potential threat they can pose on the battlefield. The lighter skin color compared to normal brethren might make them harder to find the dusty brown environment they call home, but these creatures are still weak to the effects of cold, and subsequently resistant against field gel and heat-based weapons, and can thus be put down with enough firepower, though this will rarely be easy as they almost never travel alone and are masters at using their environment to outflank opponents that have been trapped in confined spaces where they are most vulnerable. This in turn demonstrates a limited degree of intelligence that suggests they might not be totally far gone societally, and may yet reform as an intelligent group in the future now that the corruption of Phazon has been relieved from their home planet. But as a whole, it still makes them just as much of a threat as the more mutated brethren are, placing them within threat level Gamma. The Korba and Snatcher, while not directly related to each other, form an incredibly important symbiotic relationship with each other that has been developing for centuries and are therefore best analyzed together. The Korba is a worm-like creature that burrows into a rock surface when it is very young, and cements itself there for the rest of its life, never being able to move or change position. They possess a thin pair of clawed limbs they use to grasp prey that come near their mouth, which is a large fleshy tube with teeth that generally swallows prey whole, so the Korba can rely on its potent stomach acids to break it down. As a result of the sedentary lifestyle, these creatures are unable to really hunt for food in any direct way, instead relying on the sheer curiosity and stupidity of other lifeforms to drive them closer and closer to the Korba without them realizing that they are in danger. Sadly though, the climatic shifts in Bryyo in the past stripped away many of the prey items they used to gorge on, leaving them with very few creatures to eat that were not wise to their tactics. The Korba needed a helping hand, and they got one in the form of the Snatcher. The Snatcher is a very small gastropod that is able to survive in the harsh conditions of planet Bryyo by generating a thin armor plate around its soft body that can keep moisture in where it belongs. These creatures are too small and weak to do anything with their tiny jaws, and the food resources that they used to feed on were wiped away during the battle between the Primals and the Lords of Science. They required some way to get food while otherwise having no real way to attack other creatures, but they found an amazing mutual partnership with the Korba. In essence, the Snatchers will appear in large numbers whenever they feel a creature approaching, and will use their tiny mouths to latch onto their prey item. As they do this, they start to generate a powerful energy field around them that has the effect of repulsing against the electromagnetic field of the planet, allowing them to levitate. The power of a single Snatcher is not enough to lift an object, but with enough of them, levitation does become a possibility, and there is little that most prey items can do about this. Once the Snatcher brings the item close enough to the Korba hanging above them, the Korba will lash out with its arms and swallow the beast whole. After the Korba has had its fill of the prey item, it will regurgitate the harder parts that it cannot digest, which then become food for the Snatchers. This symbiotic relationship has allowed these creatures to survive in the absence of the food resources they originally developed to prey on, and while the Snatchers can be killed easily with a Morph Ball Bomb, they still perform their role perfectly and ensure that neither side ever goes hungry for long, thus providing scientists the chance to study their behavior and treasure them for the sheer ingenuity they have brought to a relationship with the Korba in the face of planetary catastrophe. Thankfully for most, this duo is still limited to feeding on fairly small creatures and thus cannot pose a real threat to larger beings, nor can they really do much to harm armored entities if they have adequate defensive shielding, so the two of them together best rest within threat level Alpha. The atomic family is comprised of a unique set of creatures that have slightly different properties and origins, but are all linked in that they are not really alive, instead being the constructs of various different races. These creatures, with the atomic corporeal energy being the textbook example, are for the most part comprised entirely of energy and have no real form of sentience, making them little more than living batteries. In fact, atomics in particular are often used as energy power sources by Galactic Federation ships. They possess a condensed energy core that saps energy from their surroundings and then uses that power to radiate electricity outward, producing a fairly large circular body with a series of cylindrical nodules on the outside that form the shape of a tetrahedron and serve to stabilize the overall shape. These creatures have no real purpose and merely seem to exist outside the control of other creatures, but this does not mean that they are benign. Though they constantly produce electricity from their cores, these entities have to maintain a stable electrical field around their cores in order to maintain a definite form. As such, when excess electricity begins to build up in their bodies, they release the excess energy in the form of a projectile of some sort, either as a fire blast of energy or as a drop bomb with a decent blast radius, with the exact type of projectile being determined by the overall structure of their personal electromagnetic field. Atomics generally do not show aggressive behavior towards others, but they are attracted to electrical sources of opposite polarity. As a result of the way most beam weapons are constructed, this means that attempting to charge a beam weapon when an atomic or any of its relatives are nearby will cause them to be drawn straight to it, forcing their electrified bodies into the unsuspecting target. Moreover, the electrical power is often enough to scramble vital technology when in close proximity, making them a viable threat even from a visual standpoint. In the case of the atomic though, its core is somewhat unstable at all times regardless, so if enough energy can be expended into them from a beam weapon of any type, it can destabilize the core entirely and cause the atomic to explode. While this can make these entities a pain to deal with if they need to be removed from one's pathway, they are not the most durable of entities and tend to leave others alone unless they are drawn in by a powerful energy source to refuel their forms, and thus belong within threat level beta. Gamers are an evolutionary offshoot of the Zoomer family, and rarely distinguished by possessing only 3 eyes, much like Silvas, and have a much thicker carapace that makes them more resilient against attack. In fact, the variants that exist on Bryyo and Talon 4 are completely invulnerable to most beam weapons, the only exception being the devastating space-powered plasma beam. These creatures have the same basic diet as the Zoomer, but they keep their spikes retracted most of the time in order to help them blend in with their surroundings. If a Gamer is threatened, however, it will extend its spines and pull its head into its armored carapace. In this state, these creatures are impossible to hurt with standard weapons, and only plasma-based weaponry and concussive weapons like missiles will be able to hurt them. Getting close to them at this point is usually a bad idea, as the spines are much larger than that of a Zoomer and can be easy to jump into if one is not paying attention. It is also noted that these creatures do not really feed on soil or rocks, instead acting as scavengers that feed off dead tissue and other organic materials, which in turn makes them just as capable of spreading disease as the Zoomer is. Despite this in the more heavily armored forms, they are still usually non-aggressive and easy to avoid as long as you watch your step, so they belonged in threat level alpha alongside their Zoomer relatives. The Fargo family consists of 2 major organisms that serve as the larval and adult form of the species. The adult creature of this family is the Fargo Hatcher, a reptilian monster that more than goes against the norm when looking at reptilian life forms. These creatures possess a massive skull and body segment that are fused together attached to a trio of legs that they use for support and locomotion. Because of their position, with 2 legs in the front and a third in the back, and the relatively inflexible joints that connect them to the main body and head though, these creatures have a slow gait that makes them fairly easy to maneuver around. The Fargo Hatcher is a generally benign creature that will not actively hunt for prey around them unless they are hungry, and their slow metabolism and limited energy expenditures on offspring means they usually don't have to hunt very often at all, which is further helped by the fact that they are all female species and merely clone their own DNA to produce more of their kind. Most of the creature's internal organs are clustered together just below the creature's mouth, making it actually possible to see their insides when they open up their massive maws. The Fargo Hatcher will generally rely on its extremely durable skin and the bony plates in its mouth to crush prey into wet chunks before swallowing them, as they have no teeth to speak of. This is probably a good thing for the Fargo Hatcher though, as the mouth is also the same hole used to dispose of waste and release the offspring, meaning that teeth could potentially act as a trap for their infants and fecal matter and can contaminate their organs and make them very sick. Fargo Hatchers have no eyes to speak of, but they can use the small spines on the back to detect the motions of air currents around them along the basic sense of touch. If they feel that a target is near them, they will energize their claws and stomp the ground, releasing an energy shield around them that both harms and repulses any attacker that tries to get near them. Moreover, if the Fargo Hatcher is feeling truly threatened, it will release a massive swarm of several dozen Fargo wasps and try to let its children take care of the attacker from there. Fargo Hatchers are usually best left alone, as they are very rare to find at all, but if they need to be killed, the only part of the body that is vulnerable to attack are their internal organs, meaning they can only be hurt when their maw opens to reveal the organ clusters. Even with this as an issue, these beings are quite sturdy and can take quite a bit of punishment to put down, so even if they aren't always aggressive, once you're in your territory, it'd be best to leave it quickly to stay safe, placing this beast cleanly in threat level beta. The Fargle wasp is the offspring of the Fargle hatcher, and in comparison to its adult form, they look highly underdeveloped and warped with a massive head that dwarfs the rest of their body. This deformed state is the result of the Fargle hatcher not investing much energy into the creation of the offspring, as they generally use them as a defense mechanism rather than real brood. Because so little energy is actually invested in the creation of the offspring, the Fargle hatcher can instantly produce dozens of Fargle wasps at a time, and can do so several times in a day without feeling much in the way of negative after effects. These offspring are genetically predisposed to defend their parent fiercely even after birth, and the moment that they are released and sense a target that may be a threat to their mother, they will fly towards it and detonate upon making contact with it. While the attack of an individual might barely do anything in the way of serious damage, a swarm of them can be a real threat that needs to be eliminated quickly, which shouldn't be too much of a problem, as a shot from any type of weapon can easily kill them. Fargo wasps rarely ever live to adulthood as a result of their weaponized state, but the few that do make it mature rapidly after a few hours of life outside of their parent, helping to keep the otherwise limited populations thriving in some state of ecological balance. As they stand in this form though, even a single shot from a weak weapon of any sort is enough to kill them, and possibly even more than one in a single shot, so they can't be placed any higher than threat level alpha. Bryyo fire is so named for its incredible volumes of flammable fuel gel, which is so abundant that it flows like a river all across this part of the planet and renders most life forms that exist in the area adapted to survive on and within it. As such, much of the area has been altered by the Galactic Federation, and because the additions to the area match the colors and form used by the Bryyo Mach to construct the few ancient remnants of the civilization left, it can sometimes be hard to tell what was made by them and what was added by the Galactic Federation. Fuel gel's extremely volatile nature makes it a dangerous commodity to work with, so the area is equipped with the most advanced pumping systems on the planet, and is an efficient system for the most part. Though the local Reptilicus still do not approve of it and will actively attack anyone they spot going even close to the machines, making it more of a hostile environment than the Galactic Federation would like. Though this land was once likely a sacred temple for the honored members of the Reptilicus, and turned a dedication to their great society, the only thing that remains are statues and structures of their fallen rulers, a grim reminder of the dark fate that they themselves brought upon the land without understanding the consequences fully. It was here that the hunter learned that Rundus had been corrupted by the influence of Dark Samus, and was forced to terminate him, as well as the site where she terminated one of the Leviathan shield generators protecting the Bryyo seed from interference. Saddle up and get your anti-corrosion gear ready, as we're diving right into all that fuel gel to take a look at some of the more minor entities in this area. Embers are tiny insects that live entirely off of fuel gel and are only known to appear in places like Bryyo Fire where the substance is highly abundant. They're able to fly with surprising grace in the air and are relatively hard to target, but this should not be much of an issue since they are effectively harmless. The only real way to attract them is by entering morph ball form and letting the bright light inside the ball attract them, and from there they can be killed with morph ball bombs. It is noted though that keeping an eye on them might not be such a bad idea for those on a sightseeing tour, as these are the creatures that are preyed on most often by gel rays, so watching clusters of embers over pools of fuel gel may be the best way to catch a glimpse of these otherwise rare beasts. The scorched bug is a small insect that is exclusively found on plants that produce fuel gel, but is originally endemic to Bryyo, only arriving on other planets as a result of hitching a ride on transport ships ever since the Galactic Federation started to ship the material to other parts of the galaxy. These creatures subsist on fuel gel alone, and as a result of this diet, they have taken on the volatile characteristics of the material. If these creatures are shot with any type of energy-based weapon, they will burst into a small explosion and leave a small scorch mark in the process, hence their namesake. Scorch bugs are usually not a serious threat on their own, and can thus be ignored, though if one is looking for fuel gel, they can be a blessing, as they are able to move through any type of nook or cranny to find their food source, and are quite reliable for locating new deposits of the volatile substance. The Bryyo bomb plant is a strange plant that is completely subterranean in form and has evolved the ability to create energy for itself simply by directly absorbing the thermal energy given off by fuel gel, which courses through the soil and rocks of Bryyo Fire. These creatures possess a cup-like formation of 5 leaves that are slightly bent inwards to give them the appearance of a hollow vessel, while the center of the plant possesses a few thin organic strands that connect the body to the white, glassy thermal organs the plant uses to gather energy. These plants are large enough to block the pathways of objects like morph balls and cannot be rolled past, but a morph ball bomb is usually enough to destroy the main plant. However, if this is done, the attacker must move quickly past it, as the roots of the plant possess incredible regenerative powers and can regrow the leaves and thermal organs in a matter of seconds after their initial destruction. Bryyo spores are the spores of an unknown plant form on Bryyo that is apparently able to release massive volumes of these objects in isolated areas such as the air docks in Bryyo Fire and Thorn Jungle. They possess a form that resembles a series of small twigs that have been stuck together at a central growth point and tend to be asymmetrical, although whether or not this is intentional has yet to be determined. They serve no significant biological purpose to the natives, and limited data on the life cycle leaves their scientific classification indeterminable at the moment. but it is known that they seem to possess traces of fuel gel in their bodies like many of the creatures on Bryyo, as we will die in a small explosion whenever they hit by a shot from a beam weapon. The gel ray is a benign creature that is more than differentiated from other large creatures on Bryyo in that they are actually capable of living in fuel gel for the entirety of their life. This is only possible because of a special chemical slime that the gel ray excretes over its body that repels the extreme heat and volatile nature of the substance, and thus makes it little more than thick, sluggish water. The mobility is further reinforced in their body shape, as their flat body form makes it very easy for them to simply glide through the substance without having to really waste energy swimming through it. The gel ray mainly spends its time eating small insects like embers and other creatures that either live in fuel gel or are immune to its vapors, and can thus fly somewhat low to the ground near it. They will rarely show their face on the surface, but if a gel ray can sense an insect above them, it is not uncommon to see them leap high into the air to catch the creature, providing a brief glimpse of their form before they submerge themselves back into their fuel gel pool. These monsters are completely harmless on their own, and should thus not be seen as a problem, though one should still watch their movements to ensure they don't accidentally collide when one is trying to jump over the pool of fuel gel they are living within. Let's now examine more closely the more prominent and potentially dangerous creatures that can be found in this fuel gel soaked location. Unlike the juveniles, Gragnal adults can be a bit of a chore to deal with as a result of the exceptionally durable and flexible exoskeleton they develop as they mature into reproductive age. While the tails of young Gragnal are unusually long and serve as a mark of distinction, it is only in their adult form this tail comes to serve an extremely important purpose in their survival. As these creatures mature into an adult life stage, they develop a small electromagnetic organ in the tail that is utilized to generate an energy barrier around their bodies. With this shield, they are effectively immune to damage from all types of conventional weaponry, though they can still be stunned with an explosive strike from a missile. These insectoids will fly through the air using their developed wings in the search for smaller prey to kill and devour, mainly targeting small insects like the Bryyo bee. They are able to use bursts of Phazon energy or acid in the absence of Phazon in order to kill otherwise incapacitated targets before swooping down and using their small fangs to bite into a prey's vital organs, causing internal bleeding of their nasty wounds that can make it impossible for the prey to escape before being eaten alive. This makes them just as much of a threat to most humans, but there is one weakness these creatures have that can be exploited with the right equipment. The tail of the adult Gragnal is effectively their primary source of power, but its large size and the electromagnetic energy it exudes makes it a handy target for grapple lasso technology, and further acts as a plug for the vital organs in their main body cavity. As such, it is possible to use the grapple lasso to latch onto their tails and then pull them off, which will cause their internal organs to spill out and therefore kill them instantly with relatively little hassle. Well, they definitely might be a noteworthy upgrade from the juvenile stage, and thus can be a pain to deal with without being able to target their primary weakness. The fact that they are still unable to deal even severe damage to most makes them a minor threat to well-armored explorers, in turn placing them within threat level alpha as well. The Warpound is a quadrupedal reptile that's often used by the native Reptilicus of the planet Bryyo as a guard dog and extra backup in case of a fight. These creatures possess a thick, stocky body with a large mouth filled with sharp teeth and the front of their jaw as a weapon to use in battle. In truth though, these creatures rarely ever die on meat and instead subsist mainly on fuel gel. Unlike most creatures that die on the substance though, the bodies of the Warpound are non-explosive and cannot be triggered into detonating, though they do seem to be susceptible to damage on the belly from small explosives like morph ball bombs. In fact, these creatures are actually surprisingly difficult to take down, as the thick hide protects them from most forms of attack and makes them even harder to kill than Reptilicus that often command them. These entities will generally try to attack opponents in close quarters by rushing at them and snapping with their jaws, but when they are not on the offense, they usually try to repel others near them by stomping the ground and releasing an energized wave of vaporized fuel gel to repel attackers. From afar, these creatures can also spit streams of the volatile substance to attack, which will not only inflict considerable damage against a target, but will actually cause them to be stuck in place, as the sticky substance slows them down and makes them vulnerable to attacks from other creatures. The Warpound's most astonishing feature and the reason for its name, however, is its amazing ability to teleport short distances in a given area in order to evade attack and flank a target when they least expect it. It is not fully understood how they are able to do such a feat, but it is thought that their consumption of fuel gel on a constant basis, combined with a unique brain anatomy, allows them to channel the intense energy in the substance and use it to create a temporary warp portal that can then be used to transport these beasts to a different position in the immediate area. The nature of this power is still a bit dangerous though, as the creature does not have full control over it and thus may occasionally teleport to an area where it did not want to be in. Regardless, this makes Warpounds very dangerous to face, especially since they almost always attack in small groups or in the presence of Reptilicus hunters. With that said though, their diet of fuel gel makes them very susceptible to the effects of cold, so a well-timed ice missile can be used to severely slow them down and eventually freeze them solid when they are low in health, making it fairly easy to finish them off. While it does seem that the native Reptilicus have managed to find a way to tame these beasts, it is ill-advised that explorers take one back home and try to do the same, not just for the extreme aggression, but also the need for fuel gel as a food source, and given the threat they pose to anyone that they don't recognize, they are best placed within threat level Gamma. The pillbug and its relatives are generally benign creatures that are mostly found within the confines of Aether, though variations of its form have been transported to many other planets in the past. Phazon pillbugs in particular share much in common with normal pillbugs. The only major difference is that these creatures have adapted to use Phazon to energize their shells, creating an electrical field that slightly increases their contact damage radius when they are curled up. These insectoids possess a small body form with no real visible limbs or features, aside from a distinctive head shield and segmented body. They prefer to dwell in dark caverns, as it makes them less vulnerable to predators, which makes sense as they lack any sort of eye system to see where they are going, or any predator that may be coming towards them, but they can effectively survive in any reasonable environment they are placed within. These entities navigate the tunnels that they build using a series of sensitive extrasensory organs on the edges of the segmented body, and use them to detect slight differences in textures so they can easily find moss and fungus to feed on, which are the sole sources of food they are equipped to eat for nutrition. Despite lacking anything in the way of eyes, these creatures can move deceptively fast, and often roll their bodies up to not only move even faster, and sometimes grip the surface of an object so tightly that they'll move up and around platforms, but as a defensive move, as they can easily ram into other small creatures while in this state, while suffering little in the way of recoil damage. They are essentially impossible to hurt directly in this state, but the concussive force of a morph ball bomb can dislodge them and reveal their soft underbellies, which can then be used to kill them with a few more bombs. Though they might be annoying and use their bodies to make traversing small tunnels more frustrating, the Phazon pillbug is otherwise fairly easy to deal with and dispatch, giving it a place within threat level Alpha. The gelbug is the adult form of the shellbug, and is well protected against direct attack as a result of the organic phasite shell that has grown around its body, though now it is unable to construct its shell as such without Phazon, and is thus much more vulnerable to attack in the present. While they might have relied on insects and other creatures to live in field gel as a larva, the adult gelbug feeds on nothing but field gel for food, and the energy that it provides is more than enough for them to survive without ever having to move very far from their food source of choice. As a result of this diet, these creatures have slowly begun to generate a shell of the material over their phasite armor that is saturated with crystals of the substance. As a result of this biological issue, their otherwise sturdy bodies have been rendered highly unstable, and a little bit of applied energy is enough to ignite the crystals growing on their backs, killing them instantly. Even so, these monsters are not to be ignored, as the explosion that they create when they die can be fairly damaging, and they have a habit of retracting into a curled shape when they are being attacked, causing them to bounce around like a living grenade that needs to be destroyed before it makes contact with an individual and explodes right in one's face. Without the protection of that phasite shell, these creatures have been rendered relatively weak to assault, but the population has thankfully remained stable, as the crystallized form of fuel gel is generally difficult to digest and therefore grants them few to no natural predators. Nonetheless, they can still be an extreme hazard to anyone regardless of how heavily armored they might otherwise be, and their explosive bodies can be about as difficult to deal with defensively as much as tossing a live grenade into an enclosed space, making threat level beta an acceptable place for them. Shriek bats are an extremely common type of life form found on many different planets, and all have the same basic anatomy and powers. In this particular case, Bryonian shriek bats, as the name might suggest, are exclusive to the planet Bryyo and are merely differentiated from their close relatives by the fact they look much more like traditional Earth bats, with larger fleshier wings, though their behavior is otherwise identical to the norm. These mammals, though often appearing more insect-like in many cases, are very similar in behavior to Earth bats, and generally spend most of their lives roosting in caverns where they feed on insects, reptiles, and even small mammals for sustenance. Their vicious little teeth are sharp enough to pierce soft hides, and can easily wound even creatures as large as humans, though this is usually not the attack pattern that larger creatures will have to worry about facing. While they come in many varieties, these creatures are all alike in that they possess extremely high body temperatures, peaking at about 121 degrees Celsius. The exact reason for possessing such high body temperatures is still uncertain, but because of this, these entities need to rest and hang from cool cavern ceilings in order to keep their bodies as cool as possible. While they may behave very similarly to screes in that they are very aggressive and territorial, and will swoop down anything that dares to get near them, the results are dramatically different. When shriek bats feel that they are in danger, they will drop down from the roosting spot and quickly rush towards the victim at full force. Upon hitting them, the hypothalamus goes out of control and instantly elevates their body temperature so fiercely that it tips them over the edge and causes them to explode in a massive thermal discharge. This explosion is usually enough to damage most creatures and even kill smaller ones, but the shriek bats pay the ultimate price in dying for the cause. Even so, this defensive behavior has helped these creatures to become some of the most common beasts on the planets they occupy, and are in turn something to look out for, though they are easy to eliminate as a single shot is usually enough to trigger the ignition automatically and cause them to self-destruct. What does this all mean for the average explorer, then, you may ask? Simple. Keep a close eye out for them and either get the heck out of their way when they try to dive bomb you, or blast them apart from a distance. Regardless, they shouldn't be too much of a serious risk if you have decent bodily protection, given their frail forms and tendency to commit the die action with their only primary attack, and easily can get away with an assignment to threat level Alpha. Rondus was a bounty hunter that once worked with the Hunter during the beginning of the Phazon Crisis, before ultimately being turned against her and forced to fight to the death. Rondus was a native of Phrygia, a moon of Best 3 known primarily for ice mining. Not surprisingly, this also meant that Rondus' powers and those of his people were based on ice, and they could expertly manipulate and generate ice from seemingly nowhere, a trait that Rondus has more than used to his advantage as a bounty hunter, which is actually quite rare, as most people of his native moon do not go into the bounty hunting profession. As a bounty hunter, Rondus enjoyed his job to the extreme, and had been known to take trophies from all his victims he had either captured or killed. Though known for getting results in every mission, he was also quite cocky and arrogant about his workmanship, and often worked as a solo agent as a result. Considering himself to be unrivaled in his field, Rondus rarely ever worked with others, as he felt that they would just hold him back. But it is known that he did seem to share a friendly relationship with the Hunter, a relationship that would otherwise be deemed scandalous due to discrimination against interspecies relationships of all kinds on his homeworld. Rondus, along with the Hunter, Gore, and Gandrader, was hired by the Galactic Federation at the start of the Phazon Crisis in order to cleanse all of the infected Aurora units in the Kalandor region of the Phazon-based virus the space pirates had uploaded onto them to cripple the network. Rondus participated in the attack on Norian as well, and saved the Hunter on 2 occasions, first from a band of space pirate ATC units, and then from falling to her death in Generator C after defeating Meta Ridley. Sadly, along with the others, he was afflicted with Phazon corruption by Dark Samus, and was outfitted with a PED suit 2 weeks after the incident, being sent to Bryyo in order to find the Leviathan that had crashed there and eliminate it. However, when the Federation lost contact with him, the Hunter was sent in to investigate. While she observed Rondus on several occasions, and even spotted his gunship at the Fiery Air Dock, the two of them did not lock sight for long until she was attacked by space pirate forces in the Temple of Bryyo. While she was able to hold her ground for a while, the numbers against her started to add up, and it seemed like she was in trouble. Out of nowhere, Rondus appeared and used his cryogenic powers to freeze and kill every single remaining space pirate in the room. But when the Hunter approached him, he launched a wave of frigid energy at her that froze the floor and passageways she had come out of. Confused, she looked closely at Rondus again and saw a brief flicker of an aura around his body, a figure she knew all too well. It became crystal clear that Rondus had been totally corrupted by the influence of Dark Samus and turned into her personal puppet, leaving it up to the Hunter to defeat him in battle. As a result of his ability to generate ice on a whim, Rondus' attacks were all built around this, as he could fire a triplet of freezing energy streams that could stop the Hunter in her tracks and potentially follow it up with a signature weapon, the Ice Missile, in order to deal immense damage. This was further demonstrating his ability to fire winding lines of ice at a target to freeze them from much farther away. He could also generate ice pillars in order to create a closed environment where he could easily hide and trap fast-moving targets, and he could generate both massive hunks of ice that he could throw at opponents as a projectile, and a massive ice club that could be used to severely bludgeon his targets into submission. Defensively, Rondus also demonstrated his ability to coat himself in armor made from ice, making him effectively invulnerable to damage. However, there was a weak point in the armor right around his neck, and if the armor could be damaged sufficiently to stun Rondus for a few seconds, a strong pull from the grappled lasso could be used to rip the armor right off, leaving his main body exposed to direct attack until he managed to regenerate his armor once more. The fact that Rondus was able to surf through the air on self-generating ice and had the capacity to freeze missiles in the air before they hit him, as well as the capacity to enter hyper mode with low energy, made him a terrifying and difficult opponent at best, but the Hunter was eventually able to subdue him. For a moment after his defeat, it looked like Rondus had finally snapped out of his control and was ready to join her again, when Dark Samus forced him to use his own power to impale himself on a giant ice spike, killing him instantly. Despite the fact that he likely at least went out with his memories and senses fully restored, and thus at least died away from Dark Samus' immediate control, Rondus was nonetheless an extremely powerful fighter whose history of bounty hunting made him a great asset for whoever could actually afford his skills, and thus rightfully deserves a place within threat level Delta. The Bryyo Thorn Jungle was an overgrown maze filled with massive plant and fungal forms that blocked the sight of most that dared try and look into it from afar. This made the area perfect as a hiding spot, and was where the last Lords of Science lived before he was killed, which is especially evident in looking at all of the finished and nearly finished war golems scattered across the land. Originally being the only hospitable place left on the planet before the cliffside area was cleaned up, this land was the only place left where any creature could really live, but thanks to the last Lord of Science, the cliffside area was rendered habitable shortly before he met an untimely execution by the Primals after accidentally revealing his location. It is noted though this area was the only one that was not touched by the corruption of Phazon during the Phazon Crisis, leaving the environment as clean and serene as it had been many years ago in the decline of the Bryyo society. The Phazon space pirates set up a major base here during the Phazon Crisis and used a pair of powerful artillery cannons to fight off any ship that dared to even get near the Leviathan shield generator there. But the Hunter was able to destroy not only a pirate Hussar and his Korok beast, but both the TM and anti-aircraft cannons in place, in turn enabling her ship to fire the Leviathan's shield generator and destroy it to make it possible for her to enter the Leviathan seed and destroy the Phazon core inside of it. With that said, let's examine the local biota and see what can be found here within this thorny terrain. The spike bush is one of the few small plant forms to survive the environmental devastation of Bryyo in the past, and it seems to have adapted perfectly to surviving in the remaining semi-harsh land. With an appearance similar to earth thistles with a bulb in its center, which will flower for only a few days per cycle for reproduction, these plants will usually shake a little bit when touched, but they are harmless to explorers wearing some sort of armored protection. The creatures foolish enough to try and eat the plant, however, are not so lucky, as the spike bush produces a potent toxin in its leaves that can cause severe gastrointestinal issues if eaten in large quantities. The Korite beast, which is native to Bryyo, doesn't really count as part of normal space pirate forces, but its modification and treatment by them as rare prizes among pirate hussars and all troops in general nonetheless makes it justifiably associated with the organization. Korite beasts stand on 4 limbs, the back 2 of which are much larger and allow them to move at a slightly steady gait, and each are tipped with large claws that can easily pierce soft flesh and crush bone when used in close quarters. The main body of these beasts is heavily armored both naturally and with face-high plating near the head region, where its skull is thinner in the past, making it very difficult to deal any sort of direct damage to them, though they still seem to be entirely vulnerable to the intense heat and caustic effects of fuel gel. Their beam-resistant hide is further complemented by the enormous ramming spike on the front of their lower jaw, right below the circular mouth, as well as a pair of false tusks made from the thick hide that covers their face. As a result of Phazon infusion, these creatures in the past could radiate Phazon as a vapor from their feet and mouths, and were fully powered by it in the heat of battle, requiring little in the way of actual food to keep their body going. Korite beasts will usually try to attack by leaping at their prey from short and medium range in an attempt to crush and skewer them with their legs. In addition, these beasts possess a very long elastic tongue they can shoot out to try and draw prey in closer before pouncing on it with all of their might. While these creatures are generally impervious to all forms of conventional weaponry, there is a sensitive nerve cluster in the tongue and mouth that can be damaged to force them into a regenerative stance. As they try to compose themselves, the creatures would start to glow on their underside, signaling that they were drawing energy from the Phazon nodules that have been developed around their heart. Sustained concussive damage to this area from morph ball bombs could then cause the creature to topple over, weakened from the assault. The Korite beast's tail possesses nerve endings that can't be stressed to force it to reveal its heart to attack, but it is only in this stunned state that the tail is limp enough to not resist grabbing. As such, this is the best moment to use a tool like the grapple lasso to pull the endings and force the creature to rear up on its hind legs, revealing its heart and thus rendering it open to attack from high-powered weapons. Even so, and even without Phazon to power them up in more recent times, Korite beasts are formidable opponents that take many steps to defeat, which only serves as a powerful reminder of the power that Phazon can grant living organisms even as it slowly saps away their consciousness, and makes them a perfect addition to threat level Gamma. Bryyo Ice is a mostly hidden world located on the cold, dark 40% of the planet that never faces the side of its star, and it is only accessible through a special warp portal hidden within Bryyo Fire. It had been many years since anyone had entered this area prior to the arrival of the Hunter, and it seems to be so isolated from the rest of the planet that not even radio transmissions can get into the area, though the exact reason why has yet to be fully determined. Statues of both Chozo and Reptilicus show the interactions these two races had with each other in the ancient past, as this was the home for a powerful weapon upgrade that seems to have been gifted to the Reptilicus as a sign of respect and friendship the Chozo wished to establish with them. Given its condition and the way that it is built, it is likely that Bryyo Ice is the tomb for the leaders and heroes of the Bryyo Mach, lost forever in the shadows of the planet's dark side, but otherwise untouched and undisturbed by the forces of the primals, leaving the land just as pristine as it ever was, minus the ice that has begun to overgrow most parts of the tomb. Archaeological expeditions in the future are hoping to learn more about the Reptilicus and the interactions with other races by examining this land, but it may be a while before that happens given the already hostile nature of the native Reptilicus in Bryyo Fire, which contains the only warp site to this isolated area. As you might imagine from its extreme isolation, there really aren't any living creatures of note left in the area, so for now, let's jump ahead to the last area explorers can observe on Bryyo. The Bryyo Seed serves the remnants of the Leviathan that crashed into Bryyo during the Phazon Crisis, and thus the source of all Phazon corruption on the planet prior to the destruction of Phase. The inside of this seed was a bluish color, and therefore related to basic blue Phazon, and its insides were filled with alien creatures known only by the nickname Missile Blockers, which consisted of a large bright blue eye form of some sort, covered in a thick band of brown tissue attached to the walls of the seed's interior by a series of thick organic tubes with blue Phazon flowing through them like a current. These little creatures could not cause any direct harm themselves, but they had to be destroyed by the Hunter in order to gain access to the Leviathan's Phazon core, generally taking about 5 ice missiles or 3 charged beam shots to destroy. In the main chamber of the Leviathan, the hunter was forced into a fight with the Guardian of the Seed, and after a long battle, she was able to destroy the monster and absorb its Phazon energy, using it to then kill the Seed's Phazon core. And, speaking of said Guardian, when the last Lord of Science on Bryyo grew desperate to save the planet and try to undo the damage that had been done, he created a powerful class of war golems that not only used the technology of the present, but also the magic used in the past by the primals to create a devastating weapon that was a source of great fear among the primals. One of these golems somehow found itself in the company of the Bryyo Seed, and over a fairly short period of time, the Phazon core within the Leviathan began to corrupt and energize the machine until it was reactivated, turning it into a massive war machine that the hunter had to fight and destroy in order to gain access to the Phazon core of the Bryyo Seed. The Garner was an extremely well-armored creature built in the image of Reptilicus that is impossible to hurt with conventional weaponry, its stone form rendered indestructible by the Phazon energy seeping through it. The Garner drew energy from a number of red energy orbs that are connected to power sockets in its body. While they likely could have acted as morph ball slots while the machine was still in its normal state, the orbs connected to these sockets were filled with pure Phazon energy, even though the shell protecting them from harm was very thin. Sustained gunfire could damage these orbs and ultimately destroy them, at which point the energy sockets of the Garner would be vulnerable to attack. Because the creature demonstrated the ability to summon pillars with energy orbs in order to replace those that were destroyed, it only seemed to laugh heartedly at the hunter for attempts at hurting it as a result. The only way to shut it off was to destroy each of the sockets on its body before they could be filled with another orb, and doing so was not an easy task as the creature possessed 3 on the front of its body and a single socket on its back. Plus it had the ability to switch the position of the energy orbs in its body in order to better protect each of its sockets from damage. In terms of offensive attacks, the Garner was named as a war golem for a reason, possessing many different attacks to crush its opposition. Despite its large bulk, the Garner could easily lift its foot off the ground and slam it back down to send a wave of rocky Phazon ore towards the target. In fact, the rocky monster could actually jump, and every time that it did so, it would generate shockwaves of Phazon energy that needed to be jumped over. It could also project hands made from a strange energy force, possibly the magic used by the primals, to either attack the hunter directly or to grab replacement orbs from stands that it conjured up onto the floor of the Leviathan. Though the orbs could be destroyed before they reached the Garner, and could equally spew small balls of the strange energy as weak homing shots towards her. It could further smash the ground with its hands with such force that would destabilize the ceiling above it, sending Phazon-infused hunks of stone tumbling down onto the battlefield. The monster could then even further release a thin Phazon laser from its mouth to strike anything within moderate range of its head, though if the hunter was able to fire an ice missile in its face while doing so, it would blind the Garner and leave it to stumble around for a few moments until it bit through the ice, giving her plenty of time to gain a few free shots at its orbs. Finally, the creature could use a simple charge attack to try and squash her, but this attack was of little use as a result of its slow movement speed and could be moved behind in order to get a good shot of the orb on its back. After an energy socket was destroyed on the Garner, the creature would energize its body and effectively generate Phazon crystals on its feet that could power a protective barrier around its entire body to help keep its sockets from being damaged further. This protection was far from perfect, however, as the Phazon crystals could be easily removed with morph ball bombs. The Garner proved to be a worthy adversary for the hunter and was able to close its sockets from time to time to minimize the amount of time its energy orbs were vulnerable, but with enough patience, she was able to destroy the monster and subsequently absorb its energy, overloading her with enough Phazon energy to release it as a lethal stream of energy at the revealed Leviathan core, killing it and the rest of the seed along with it. While the Phazon used to help power this ancient machine once more might not be present any longer, the sheer might of this creation nonetheless shows the great craftsmanship of the race that once reigned supreme on planet Bryyo. And although any genuine trace of their culture in flesh is gone, the immense effort needed to take down this entity is nonetheless impressively noted, landing in a spot within threat level Delta. I hope you all have enjoyed this look into the natural biota of planet Bryyo, and as long as you were paying attention, you might just easily survive a trip there. We're scrounging up some funds for another expedition as we speak, so stay tuned and get ready to do some serious cloud gazing, even if it's not something you usually partake in, for our next stop is Skytown on planet Elysia. Thank you for reaching the end of this presentation. While we might not always get along, the Space Pirates and myself, in whatever capacity we can manage, are dedicated to analyzing and examining the life forms of many different worlds, extant and extinct, to show the great variety of life that exists out within the greater cosmos. If you enjoyed this info video and would like to see more, please like, comment, and subscribe for more information. We'll do our best to keep pumping out data so the greater public has an understanding of what to expect when exploring alien planets and their denizens. With that, have a safe journey, and have your bribes prepared beforehand if you happen to come near our territory.